Okay, well, welcome everybody to Torah Study. We were off last week, so we're getting close to the end of Exodus. And, okay, that is working. So would somebody be willing to pray to start us, please?
I will.
Thank you.
So, Father, we just thank you for this morning. We thank you for Shabbat, a time to rest and just take in all that is you. And so today, Lord, as we just open up your word, we just ask for an increased revelation of Yeshua throughout the scriptures, the continuity of your word, who you are, your identity, so that we may know you and love you more. So we just ask that your peace and your presence would be on this time, and we ask it in Yeshua's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. So, okay. So there's a lot in this Torah portion, and we're not going to cover most of it. But there's a TV playing. So as I was reading through, there was a kind of a short section that actually really stuck out to me that I kind of wanted to focus on. So this portion, of course, has kind of the ending, a little bit of some of the ending of setting up the tabernacle. We have this cool section about the craftsmen that are basically filled with the Spirit to do some of the artwork and the weaving and all that kind of stuff for the tabernacle. We have, of course, this molten calf and breaking the tablets. And then we have the ending is, this awesome passage of the 13 attributes of God. Adonai kind of passing over by Moses. And I really kind of wanted to do that, but that's not what we're going to do. We're going to talk about Shabbat. I know. It was hard. I was like... But I was reading about this Shabbat section, which is only a few verses, and I kind of just couldn't get past it. So, since I'm the one that they're letting teach this study, then that's what we're going to talk about. So, you're at the mercy of the one who's sitting over here, I guess.
I'm cool with it.
But it does kind of connect. So, I know we've kind of been on and off the last several weeks with Torah Study, but I've been teaching the last several times that we've been here, and we've talked about, if you remember back several weeks, we've talked about Sinai as this pattern for the tabernacle, and then the starting of the construction of the tabernacle. So that has been a big focus in the Torah portions for the last several weeks, several passages. So the tabernacle is obviously a big deal. I can't remember, and I don't have my notes in front of me now from 2 weeks ago, but there's, multiple chapters. It's a very large section that talks about the construction and the design of the tabernacle. So that is generally a good indication that God cares a lot about it. But this portion that is kind of tucked in here, these few verses about Shabbat, and a few things I was reading were kind of just showing me a sense of God's order when it comes to Shabbat and the tabernacle. So, and first of all, and there's a couple of you who haven't been at Torah Study as much, so does anybody who has been in Torah Study for a while remember our two guiding questions for our Torah Study? The two main goals that we're trying to work toward? Lori, I know Laura's looking at me, she's like...
Continuity in the scriptures and finding Yeshua.
Yes. Yep. So with each portion we're looking at how does it fit into the grand, kind of this grand narrative of scripture as a whole, and also how does it connect us with Yeshua. So we're going to keep those in mind as we're talking today. So, okay. So the verses we're going to look at are in Exodus 31. And we're going to look at verses 12 through 17, really.
What chapter, sorry?
Exodus 31. It says, Then Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Speak now to Bnei Israel, saying, Surely you must keep my Shabbatot, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, so you may know that I am Adonai who sanctifies you. Therefore you are to keep the Shabbat, because it is holy for you. Everyone who profanes it will die. For whoever does any work during Shabbat, that soul will be cut off from the midst of his people. Work is to be done for 6 days, but on the seventh day is a Shabbat of complete rest, holy to Adonai. Whoever does any work on the Shabbat will surely be put to death. So Bnei Israel is to keep the Shabbat, to observe the Shabbat throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and Bnei Israel forever. For in 6 days Adonai made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he ceased from work and rested. Okay, so there is a translation decision that I think not that I have enough knowledge to really make translation decisions, but I don't know that I think they chose the best way to phrase one of these verses based on comparing several other things and a couple of commentaries of people who know a lot more about this than I do. So in verse 13, so speak now to Bnei Israel, saying, Surely you must keep my Shabbatot. So it kind of sounds like, in the middle, because remember, we're in the middle of all this tabernacle stuff. So it kind of sounds a little bit to me when I read that, just like a little reminder of keep Shabbat, right? Well, so does anybody else have another translation other than Tree of Life? What does yours say?
It says, in which verse?
So in verse 13.
It says, Speak also to the children of Israel, saying, Surely my Sabbaths you shall keep.
Okay.
It is a sign between me and you.
Okay. Anybody else? Do you have something different, Nadia?
Yeah, it's the same, I think, with 13 years you are to speak to the people of Israel and say, above all
else.
you shall keep my Sabbath, for this is a sign between me and you throughout generations.
So you said that's ESV, right?
Yeah.
So ESV says, above all, you must keep my Shabbat. So that gives you a little bit more of the sense of this is really important. Do you have something different?
I have CJB. It says, Tell the people of Israel, you are to observe my Shabbats, for this is a sign between me and you through all your generations, so that you will know that I am Adonai who sets you apart for me.
Okay, so it says you shall tell, or you must tell?
Tell the people.
Okay. I looked up a couple other ones. So New American Standard says you must keep. So that's really similar to the CJB. I didn't even think to look at that one. I don't know why. The version that Dennis Prager uses in his commentary, which I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's a really common version of the Tanakh, I think. It says, nevertheless, you must keep, which I liked. And then in Robert Alter's commentary, he says, yet my Sabbath you shall keep. So there's, it's nuance, right? But the point is, and both Dennis Prager and Robert Alter in their commentaries both pointed out that this Hebrew word it has a more definitive, it has this, you have to do this. Despite all of this other stuff going on, don't forget I told you to do this. So basically what he's saying is, what God is saying is, even in the midst of building this tabernacle, which obviously is this design from God, God is revealing the plan. God is instructing them to do this, saying that it's good, giving them all these detailed instructions, inspiring craftsmen by the Holy Spirit to do all this artwork and all these different things. And, but he's saying, but still in the midst of this, you need to keep Shabbat because it's holy and I set it apart and I told you to do it. So I just thought that was really interesting. So it seems that Shabbat we talk about Shabbat a lot, but Shabbat seems to be important. I know that's kind of well, duh. But it's let me keep going and we'll come back and I'll try to show you a couple more things. But I really liked, you guys know I like Dennis Prager's commentary, so you get another Dennis Prager quote. About this passage, he says, God is telling Moses that despite the extraordinary importance of building the tabernacle, the Israelites must still keep the Sabbath. They are not to violate the Sabbath for the sake of completing the tabernacle. The Torah considers the sanctification of time, which would be Shabbat, more important than the sanctification, I can't say that word today, sanctification of place, meaning the tabernacle. In addition, the Sabbath, being time-bound rather than place-bound, can be observed anywhere, while the priestly service can only be performed in the tabernacle. By privileging the Sabbath over the tabernacle, the Torah thus laid the foundations for a faith not dependent on a place, but one that is timeless and universal. So, in light of well, let's talk a little bit more about Shabbat, I guess, first, before I go where I want to go. So, Sabbath is, of course, this, we've talked about this before, so this is a little bit of a review, but we talked about Sabbath is it's actually this first thing that God declares holy. Back in Genesis 2, he says that the seventh day is to be blessed and sanctified. So, then we don't really talk about a whole lot about Shabbat until what happens? What's the other event where all of a sudden we've started all this Shabbat talk again in the Torah?
I don't remember. Before this? You mean before this? Or are you talking about in the text?
So, yeah, like just in the story of Torah. So we have, obviously at creation, God is setting apart the seventh day as holy.
Yeah, I don't remember when it first came up. Is that what you're asking?
So, but what is the other event that, the name of the book that we're in? We have this Exodus, right?
Okay.
So when they come out of Egypt, he goes,
Yeah.
"You're to keep my Shabbat," right?
Mm-hmm.
So Shabbat kind of encompasses these. It encompasses a lot more than this, but I'm gonna simplify this and say that Shabbat is about three things: rest, right? It's a day of doing no work, so it's a day of rest, and it's commemorating these two major events: creation and the Exodus. So, and of course we've talked about, and this is why I brought a couple books, because I was just thinking about them as I was thinking about this concept, is because the Exodus really becomes, of course, this kind of this template narrative almost for the rest of, and it becomes this reminder, and it's talked about through the rest of Scripture, and that's why I brought this book, Passover, The Key That Unlocks the Book of Revelation, Dan Jester's book. Because he in this lays out basically this idea that you can take the Exodus narrative and it basically correlates to a lot of what's happening in Revelation. So it follows the same pattern, a lot of the same principles. So essentially a lot of the events of Revelation are kind of another Exodus in a sense. Good morning. So then going back to, I really liked the comment that the observation that Dennis Prager made that Shabbat is about time and the tabernacle is about place. So Sabbath was set apart from the beginning of time, basically. It's part of the creation narrative. The tabernacle is designed at a particular time and place. So, okay. So basically, how do we, as a person who I really enjoy studying the tabernacle. This has been that's why I brought this all up, and I'm not sure I'm going to do a great job of explaining all of this, but because we think about the tabernacle and then later the temple as this really central aspect of Judaism, right? And of course, right now there is no tabernacle and no temple, so that makes Jewish practice a little interesting. But Sabbath is still there. So the Sabbath because remember, it's like, Prager is saying that Sabbath is what makes, it makes their faith, the Jewish faith, timeless and universal. So, basically, where do I want to go? So, I think that this is significant for us, especially as a Messianic congregation, to think about, because Sabbath is really, and this is another thing that Dennis Prager points out, as far as Judaism, traditional Judaism, it breaks down without Sabbath. Clearly, they're functioning without a temple, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like and what that means in a minute. But Sabbath is really this ongoing thing that has kept them. It's really the foundational practice that has kept the Jewish people being the Jewish people despite being exiled, being scattered, all these different things. Excuse me. So, and the tabernacle, and Prager also makes the point, like the tabernacle has been replaced by other forms of worship. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. But does that kind of make sense, like this Sabbath tabernacle connection? So let's talk about, so I kind of want to talk about a little bit about kind of a scale or a paradigm of Shabbat observance, because I think that, especially, like I said, being in a Messianic congregation, how we understand Shabbat observance, I think, is really important for several reasons. And how we think about the tabernacle and the temple is really important. And how we think about Jewish tradition and how we think about all of these things is actually really important. So let me kind of give us a scale, I guess, and then we can kind of figure out where we would maybe fit in the middle of it. So in Jewish tradition, currently, today, Orthodox. So again, let's remember, when we talk about the Jewish people, we're talking about a really wide spectrum and variety of level of practice and observance. So we have everything from like Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox practice to completely secular. And so talking about the Jewish people is talking about a very wide variety of people. So always keep that in mind. But on the one extreme end, we have the Orthodox, and so everything about Shabbat is very, I would say, regulated when it comes to Orthodox observance. They have, I have a book, which actually she's really funny. It's an Orthodox woman who wrote this book. I think she's Orthodox. Anyway, or at least was raised Orthodox. But she's actually really funny in how she writes about it, but she will write about all the traditions, and it blows my mind, all the details, because she goes through, for an assignment, I was reading through some of her, for one of my classes, I was reading through some of her comments about Shabbat, and it's like, you have Shabbat lights, where they set lights on a timer, so they don't have to flip the switch. They, they'll make all the food beforehand, in a crock pot, or they will eat cold food during the Shabbat, so they're not cooking, you're not cleaning, you're not doing any of these things, right? There's like a long list that the rabbis have codified, that it's like, you don't do all of these things, and I don't know, I didn't look at it right before I came, but it's all these really specific things that you don't do, which even goes back to, which actually is based off of this passage in some sense, because it talks about that you don't do any work, and at this point, the work that the Israelites had to do was regarding construction of the tabernacle. So a lot of the instruction about the types of work that you don't do on Shabbat are connected to the types of work that would have been required for the tabernacle, which is kind of interesting. My point is that it's very specific. You would go to a service or something maybe, but it's very, very specific about how you observe Shabbat. And then there would be, so that's kind of one extreme end of the scale. And then you would have within, Judaism, you would have everything from all of that to pieces of that to maybe doing a Shabbat dinner, but not, going so far as to set your lights on a timer. I remember when I was in Israel, this always makes me laugh. They set an elevator in the hotel. It should be the Shabbat elevator, like one of the elevators will designate, and basically it just goes up and down and stops on every floor all day. So you can just get on, and then depending on...
So you don't have to push buttons.
So you don't have to push buttons.
Come on.
Yeah. It was really... It was interesting, but...
Yeah, that is interesting.
But it's just like... It's why it's interesting to be in Israel and, like, really understand, like, the city, like, really does shut down large portions of it, and it gives you a different perspective and mindset about Shabbat, even for, people who are not as observant. It still becomes part of your natural rhythm. So, because everything's closed, so what are you going to do? Like, you just can't go anywhere. So you're just going to stay home and hang out with your family. But anyway, so all that to say, so then you would have, all from everything like that, from, everything, all those specific instructions, all the way to, a secular Jewish person, especially not in Israel, may not, do anything to mark Shabbat. May just live as a normal day. And then, of course, most of us are probably more familiar with Christianity, which has some Christian traditions, I feel like, have some regard or some concept of a Sabbath, but will put it on Sunday, which actually has a different focus. Because why do most Christians have service on Sunday and set that apart, and will sometimes use the word Sabbath for Sunday? Like, why is that the day of the week that's chosen to worship and to have fellowship and all that? What is that? What event is that connected to?
Resurrection.
The resurrection. So it's different, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's different because remember we said Judaism is connected to creation and to the Exodus, and it's the seventh day principle for rest that God commanded. So Christians are worshiping on Sunday connected to the resurrection. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying it's different. So don't hear me making that delineation that that's a bad thing. I'm just pointing out a difference. But most Christians don't have this same regard of rest for Sunday, right? At least I didn't grow up that way. Yeah?
You probably are too young to remember this, but everything closed down on Sunday.
Yeah.
It was, I don't know what year it was, but they did away with the blue law, but nothing was open.
Right. I am too young to remember that, but I have heard about that.
So it was strange to go shopping on
Yeah.
Sunday,
Well,
when
yeah.
I remember the first Sunday that there was a store open, department store open, that was going to be open on Sunday. Everybody was there, when the sun came up to
how
get
funny.
in line to be able to get in.
How funny. And of course the store's not any different on Sunday than it would have been any other day. It's just that it was open on Sunday, right?
I know, yeah.
Isn't that funny? That's really funny, yeah.
So I was wondering while you were talking, like,
Mhm.
thinking that that's the way it used to be
Mhm.
in America, but America's like retail, the whole mindset took over, kind of, and for the most part, people, like, they still maybe go to a church service on Sunday, but
Mhm.
that's about probably it. I don't know how many people still go, but, you know what I'm saying? I feel like it's dwindled way down. So how is it in Israel, like, would you say they still have some secular, but it's amazing that they still have such a, is Shabbat still like the main, that's the main thing that's prevalent in Israel?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on where you
Does
are.
the whole city stop? I mean, don't just not the whole country, but I'm sure parts of it still do.
I mean, it's a much larger scale than you. I mean, it's not everything, but it's a lot because like for example, when I was there, of course, I was on a tour, so we didn't not tour that day because if you're only there for 10 days, you kind of want to take advantage of your time, right? But the things that we did on Shabbat were different. Like we went to the Christian sites basically because they were going to have service the next day, like, so we went I'm trying to remember. We might've gone to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre that day and just done some things like more in the Christian quarter or more, not in we weren't in the old city and things like that. But like, even on like we larger scale, like the train, like the public transport train was shut down that day. So we couldn't take, we couldn't take public transportation. There were still like taxis out, but they were all the Arab cab drivers. It wasn't, which is whatever, but like, so there weren't as many cabs on the road because not everyone, any of the Jewish cab drivers weren't working. We actually had the day before, on Friday, we had gone out to Shiloh, and we had a different bus driver that day who was religious. He was a religious Jew, and he had to be back. Like, we had to set our schedule so we could be back so that he could be home and ready for Shabbat. And so it does work its way into everyday life. But there are things because there are, like, especially in Jerusalem, because it's such a mixture, and there's different areas that are more predominantly Arab, Christian, or more Islam, or more, so those sections, they would still be open because they, like the Islamic holy day is Friday and Christian holy day is Sunday. So you kind of have, everybody takes turns all weekend.
So the Islamic have a day off, though?
They do, and I don't know as much about it.
I didn't know that.
Because I don't know Islam as much. We do have, but technically it is. But it also has a very different purpose. Like, it's not connected to creation. It's not connected to.
It's still interesting that they have a day.
Yeah.
That everybody has a day.
Yeah.
And why do they all have a day?
Right. So, like, there is it does come back to this principle, but it is interesting how things have shifted,
Yeah.
Anyway, but so all that to kind of lay out our spectrum of what Shabbat observance, or even if it's not technically Shabbat, what the weekly observance would look like, So particularly looking at, Judaism, the Jewish examples and the Christian examples, what does that mean for us as a Messianic Jewish congregation?
We need to take a day of rest.
Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? What does that look like?
Pretty hard.
Yeah.
I guess it depends on how far you carry it.
Mm-hmm.
I was raised, we didn't do much on Sunday. Went to church and ate and took a nap and played football in the yard or whatever. But, other people did different things. So, but we did, you got to take care of the animals and stuff. But, you didn't do any unnecessary work.
I grew up in the Baptist church with Mike and Deanne Blake.
Uh-huh.
But it's interesting. Ladies had to wear dresses, and they'd wear hats. And Mother would fix dinner on Saturday night, so it'd be ready when we came home on Sunday. And we ate, and then until I graduated from high school and left home, I had to take a nap.
You had to take it.
And to this day,
Family nap time.
if I'm sick, I can't lay down and take a nap on Sunday. I can't. I think it's a rebellion. But it was very, they were very rigid about that.
Yeah.
Not doing any work on the Sabbath.
So, my understanding is, as being part of a Messianic congregation, a combination of the Jews and the Gentiles, that we, as Gentiles, the Gentiles have decided to align ourselves with our Jewish brothers and sisters, and therefore that's why we observe it, because we are in partnership, we are in solidarity, whatever word you want to use, in union with them. So therefore, instead of, even though we're Gentiles, believing Gentiles, we're still aligning ourselves with our Jewish brothers and sisters, and so we do Shabbat on Saturday when the Jewish people are observing it, rather than doing, I know a lot of probably people from our congregation do Shabbat, and then a lot of them may still go to Sunday worship somewhere else too, but as far as this congregation, we've chosen to align ourselves with the Hebraic calendar and the Jewish tradition.
Yeah. Yes, definitely this Jew-Gentile unity piece is significant. So how do we decide how did we decide what Shabbat looks like? So if we're establishing that being part of Messianic congregations kind of establishes that we would participate in a Saturday Shabbat, then what does that look like? Like, what are some of the things that we do, or what are some of the things you think we should do? Maybe we don't. Or what does that look like? What does the practice of Shabbat look like in a Messianic congregation?
I think it involves a lot of fellowship.
Mm-hmm. Fellowship? Yeah.
Does that mean you don't go out to the stores on Shabbat or spend money? Or I know some of the Hebrew roots people that we've been associated with, but they call it getting under the law. Well, you can't, like you said, can't push buttons, you can't make coffee, or all
Can't
these.
operate the remote.
The push buttons are getting you, isn't it?
But what you're saying is, how do we take that?
Mm-hmm.
As Christianity, used to be a day of rest on
Mm-hmm.
Sunday, but anymore stores are open. I think people just go to church and then go act like it's a normal day.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of feel like maybe we do that here too at Kingdom Living. I don't. We go out to eat. We go.
Well, at first we felt guilty going out to eat on Saturday,
Uh-huh.
After church. And then we went out one day and, anyway, I can't remember the name of the restaurant. And here was one of the leading Jewish rabbis, on Saturday. I said, well, I guess it's okay.
Yeah.
So it does, make you feel. I think it should be as far away from work as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of people, I think, prepare their dinner on Saturday night, maybe put it in the oven so it's ready when they get home, and have everybody over for dinner and sit around and, like I said, fellowship. And to me, it's not, even when we were, at Full Faith for 40 years, everybody went out to eat together after,
Mm-hmm.
or to each other's
Sure.
homes, and it wasn't, service wasn't finished, or our worship wasn't finished till we'd eaten with our friends.
Right.
And then, some people called it, chewing the pastor up, but I mean, it was, discuss what they were learning that week or whatever. And I've been thinking in my heart, I should start putting a big roast on, and just having some people over at our house after services,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that some of that's really good, and I think there is this fellowship aspect to it. I think that, the going out to eat, all that.
We've had Oneg, and that has worked.
Yeah, I miss that a
eating
lot.
together here.
Yeah.
I missed that.
So it really comes down to how we define work, as far as this particular aspect of Shabbat goes.
By we, you mean how you define work, how I define work, how he defines work. It's still essentially in the absence of a rabbinic direction. It's a free-for-all.
In some sense, it is. So this is a challenging thing, and this is partially why I'm bringing this up, because even within the Messianic movement, there's a very broad array of perspectives on this. Honestly, I just took a class with a professor that I very much disagree with, and he's a Messianic Jew. He was raised Orthodox in New York. He knows Yeshua. I very much disagree with his perspective, and he very much disagrees with mine. We had some very interesting interactions in our class.
Well, what is your perspective?
My perspective. So, and I want to come back around a little bit to some specific practice type things that would relate a little bit to service, but my perspective is that yes, it is a set apart day. I think that the definition of work, to some extent, does vary from person to person, and I think that that's okay, because when it comes to, we're gonna come back to some of this. So let's set aside some like service and particular practice and things like that for right now. If we're just looking at this idea of doing no work, I think that it's okay for there to be some level of each person evaluating what feels like work to you. in some sense. Because one thing I've learned through talking through several different people is rest looks different. Like some people do want to go home and eat and take a long Shabbat nap, you know? I want to hang out with my friends all day. Like, you know, I don't really like to take Shabbat naps. I'm like, I don't want to miss it. I don't want to sleep through it. I want to go see, you know, but I'll go and hang out with my friends and it'll be a more open-ended. It's not like, okay, I'm going to come and hang out, you know, but I have to leave at this time because I need to go do this, this, and this. It's like, I just get to kind of organically decide what to do with my day. So that is what it looks like for me. And yeah, I know for some people, you know, it would look like, having a meal together, going to a park together when it's nice, things like that. So I think that rest looks different for different people. So in that regard, I'm okay with there being a kind of a different scale of what work means. Yeah.
I think for me, it's been a progression of what does it look like, because I was coming here and attending New City both, so I was really having to learn about, you know, this side of,
Sure.
of Jesus. So it's been kind of one thing, like, where does he want me? Not trying to say, well, this is what it says, and I've got to be rigid about it. So, like, you know, it was just a gradual thing. Like, you're going to tell your employer you can't work on Saturdays, you know. And so then it was just a progression of different things, and I'm just working to get to where I feel like I want to be with the Lord all day, from Friday evening to Saturday evening. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when I'm looking in Scripture, God never changed the day. It's always been the seventh day. The early Western church fathers changed the day to Sunday. And there's a whole lot, you know, that I've researched on that and related to getting the pagans to come to church and this and that. It's a whole thing. We're not going to, you know, I mean, obviously not going to sit here and go into all that. But so, no offense to anybody here, because I was a Sunday Christian for a long time, but Sunday is not the seventh day. It's not the day that the Lord set apart. There's nowhere in here that says, okay, so now we're going to do it on the first day of the week. He never said that. So for me personally, you know, when that really resonated with me, like, well, what's cool is that, much like you, I do very organic. If somebody calls me and says, hey, you want to come over? I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not doing anything today, you know, so it's fun. It's very organic for me. But then there's times like I go home and I'm like, I like to clean. So to me, that's not work. That's relaxation for me. So like if I'm sweeping mopping the kitchen floor, I'm talking to God, I'm watching the cats run around, you know, and it's kind of a happy time for me. In the house I lived in before, my sink was, you know, looked out my backyard, and I didn't have a dishwasher, so I washed my dishes by hand, and I used to love to go home and stand there and just look out the back window and watch the squirrels play. Mm-hmm. So it's like, where's that happy place in my head with God where I'm partnering with God in all things and not making it extremely rigid. Yeah. What's cool is that, like, now on Sundays, I have a whole lot of time to get a whole lot of stuff done on Sunday. Right. Because I'm like, my Shabbat was yesterday. But I think Linda and I touched on this, like, sometimes you get 2 Shabbats, you know, or 2 Sabbaths, maybe I should say, because you get, like, Saturday and then Sunday, it's like, oh, well, I could do a few things, but then, right, we kind of talked about that a little bit, but then, you know. Yeah, I've heard some people say that, you know, it's helpful if you observe Shabbat on Saturday, but then you can also thank the church for, you know, having another day of rest on Sunday, so that you get a weekend, like, right? Yeah. Because like, that's the other thing, you know, and Leah talks about this a lot too, like in Israel, like, so yeah, everything really does shut down on Shabbat, but then on Sunday everybody gets up and goes to work. You really do work 6 days a week. Like, we are on a 5-day work schedule in America for most of us. I know that's not true for every single person, but for the most part, you know, generally accepted 5-day work week. So, anyway.
I have a clarifying question on how to word it. So I'm going to try. I guess from what I've been trying to gather, I think the last person I spoke with about it was Chris Potts, but I asked, you know, so where do we as Messianics, I'm not Jewish, you know, and I thought it was explained to me. I'm not saying he said this. I feel like I've been hearing this, maybe through a combination of Tom and everyone, that the covenant was written to Israel,
Mhm.
to the Jewish people. And a sign of the covenant is Shabbat.
Mhm.
And there's lots of other parts of the covenant. And so we're not under the law because as Gentile people, because of the covenant or the covenant regulations that were written to the Jewish people. But we're aligning ourselves with it. So but yet, I'm not gonna stop, my Shabbat observance or my Sunday. If I was doing Sunday, I would still observe a day because I was
Sure.
raised to observe a day.
Sure.
But, and I do feel like, just what everyone's been saying, I feel like it's a day to be with the Lord, and I do try to stop not going and doing anything because I can't focus on it if I'm going and doing anything. And I certainly wouldn't wanna work, like, make it like a regular work day because that would be like you're ignoring God into me, unless I had to, you know.
Sure.
But I still feel like I wouldn't be under, I might be, you know, I still feel like that's wrong because he wrote this to, if we're partnering with that covenant, it's our covenant. You know what I'm saying? So, but I don't know where that line is where it's their covenant, but we're partnering in the covenant.
Yeah. So this is a tricky thing
We're
about
grafted in though as Gentiles.
We-
We're grafted in.
We are, and so there are different opinions on what that means.
So far all we've talked about is what we don't have to do.
Right. What do we have to
in your
do?
opinion, are we obligated to do?
Sure. So let me get to that in just a second.
All right.
I'm going there, I promise. So this is where we have to look at to specifically address your question, Laura. This is where I think we have to look at several things because yes, the covenant that we're talking about with Shabbat is specifically made with Israel. But that's why we can't look at just one thing. We have to this is where we have to think about the whole narrative of Scripture a little bit. So if we think about things like, there's lots of different places you could go, and this kind of goes with what Sabra was saying too, is like that God doesn't change, you know, and so he's not changed. And so to agree with your point, yes, he's not changed. The Sabbath doesn't ever change from the seventh day to the first day of the week. I don't have a problem. Let me just say this. I have no problem with the fact that the majority of Christians worship on Sundays. I have zero problem with that. It is a different thing. If you really want to split hairs, would say that I would just call it something different than a Sabbath because, like I said, I don't think we can use the term Sabbath. I would prefer not to use the word Sabbath loosely because God clearly defines that it's the seventh day. But also, like we're saying, it is a covenant made with Israel. So that if, Gentile Christian world is worshiping on Sundays and they're worshiping God and that is a day of rest for them, I have no problem with that. That is completely fine with me.
As long as they take a day to rest or to worship or focus on the Lord.
Yeah, because I think, and there is, and I think also it goes back to there is a lot of, it's a more complicated issue with that because it is connected with anti-Semitism and it is connected with a lot of bloody history in the church. We could talk about the Quarter-Deciman controversy and Constantine and we can talk about all that. We're not going to. But the point is there are points we can go back to in history where there were specific decisions to separate Christian worship from the Jewish calendar, and that has snowballed and created a lot of problems. But if you would like to read about that and learn more about that, read Michael Brown's book, Our Hands Are Stained with Blood. Mm-hmm. It's a challenging book, but it gives our small group did that.
I forgot.
But it gives a good overview of some of the history and why some of these things happen and why some of these things are such a big issue. So there's another book recommendation for you if you want to go down that road. But coming back to this particular Shabbat commandment, because we do have to remember other passages like Acts 15 I would come back to. So Acts 15, gives us, some things that the Gentiles are required to do if they're going to follow this God of Israel. But Shabbat is actually not one of them, right? And part of that is, because we have to remember, the Bible was written to a particular people in a particular time. So in that time, in Roman civilization, the Romans it's not gonna fly with the Romans for all these people to be like, hey, we can't work. It's just not really gonna work. It does, the Romans like to torture and be terrible to people. So it's going to become a really big problem. And so, and they still have to live and work and, and all these things. And so it's a really complicated situation. So, but going back to, I think the point of your question is, how do we know what to follow? We are particular, so I would say most of the Messianic Jewish movement. So Hebrew roots is a slightly different thing. Keep that in mind. That the Hebrew roots section of whatever would potentially disagree with some of what I'm about to say, but Messianic Jewish movement, for the most part, really does not push for conversion to full Judaism. So what that means is they're not pushing for Gentiles to fully convert and take on all of Jewish law. So, but we also want Jewish people within Messianic congregations to keep Jewish identity, right? So we do want them to be Torah observant. However, the challenge with that, and I'm glad this is coming up, and I know we're not going to get all the way into all of these issues, but I'm trying to lay out the framework of our movement here a little bit, but because what it means to be a Torah observant Jew in a lot of Messianic understanding, not all, is based off of scripture and not necessarily all of what the rabbis say. So we're going to come back to that in a second too, which we'll get back to what you were asking. I promise I have a path. I'm going somewhere. So it's complicated is the point. But I think this idea of this Jew-Gentile unity and Messianic congregation does come back to, it requires, we like to use the term deference in our congregation a lot. We have deference for each other, meaning that we want to support our Jewish members being Jewish, but we also want our Gentile members to remain Gentile, which is going back to my point of saying that most of the Messianic movement does not promote conversion to Judaism for Gentile members. So all that to say, there's not a concise answer to your question, which is why it's a hard thing to wrestle with. Because what does that look like? Because we are worshiping on Shabbat. We are having a Saturday service, which for Gentiles, for most of us who grew up in the church, is actually a sacrifice. Like, our culture isn't really set up that way.
Yeah.
So to have it is, even though, like you're saying, like it used to be a much bigger delineation because things did shut down on Sundays and there was more of a cultural acceptance of a Sunday day of worship and rest. That doesn't exist so much now, but still, like there are still some areas where it is harder. Even like families with kids, like sports all happen on Saturdays, and there's all kinds of things that happen on Saturdays because everybody's supposed to be free. And so when you have a Shabbat rhythm of Sabbath on Saturday, worship service on Saturday, things like this, it does impact the rest of your life.
I'm sorry, there's a bigger question that you don't have to answer now, but the bigger question in my mind was, how is it, and this is a huge thing, how is it different for, when you're talking with a Jewish person who's not received Yeshua, how is it different? What's the new covenant difference for them coming into Yeshua? So because if we're welcoming into our community, I'm sure the leaders and elders and teachers know who have that background, and you have the background to know. Does that change for them? I know, because there's different types of, there's Orthodox and non-Orthodox, but when you say Torah observant, I don't know if the new covenant coming into Yeshua, does it change for them what they are observing? Or does it just mean because I was taught, and wrongly I'm sure, but just in a regular Christian church, that the new covenant did away with all the law, because it didn't do away with all the law, because when I read it, and I never really believed a lot, because every time God said, this is an everlasting covenant between me and God said it was an everlasting ordinance, then why are we saying God did away with it? But so, I don't feel like I know that he didn't do away with all the law, but did some things change for them coming into the new covenant? You don't have to answer it now, but because I've had some interface with some Orthodox, Jewish people, and I don't really know, I didn't know how to address why I felt like there was a place for Jewish people to come and worship in our community, and I was trying to invite him, or not really, because I didn't feel like he was ready, but, we had conversations. I didn't know how I could explain what it would be like for him. I had no clue.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have to go over that now, but, that's just because I haven't learned enough. You have to know if it
No,
changes for them.
it's a good
the new
question.
Covenant change for them? Or does Torah Observance change for them in the new covenant?
So I would say yes and no. And again, it's complicated. So this comes back to this wide array of beliefs. So for an Orthodox person, so I've heard different testimonies from Orthodox Jewish people who have come to know Yeshua. Some find a lot of comfort in the Orthodox tradition, and they will want to keep a lot of the tradition, a lot of the daily prayer services and Shabbat service, and a lot of the traditions, because it is comforting. But they will either add additional prayers, or or they'll also go to a Christian service or a Messianic Jewish service or something. It looks different, I think, for a lot of people, or they'll add New Covenant scriptures into the reading schedule or something like that. And so there's a wide range of what that looks like. But there's also a lot of people, I've heard testimonies of Orthodox Jewish people who, when they come to know Yeshua, they feel like a lot of the rabbinic tradition and a lot of that they have observed their whole life had felt very, I don't know what the right word to say is, was maybe just too strict, or it didn't it was just ritual. It didn't hold a lot of spiritual meaning to them. And so they would prefer not to participate in all of that structured tradition and would be more comfortable in a service like ours. So coming around to our services, we are very unique as a Messianic congregation. And I think it's important that we remember that. Because we're a Messianic congregation and not a Messianic synagogue. And that is significant as well, because a Messianic synagogue would hold more of a synagogue type of service. Again, having liturgy and readings and things like that highlight Yeshua, but it would follow more of a Torah service, more of a traditional Jewish liturgy type of structure, whereas ours is very much a blend. And there are some in the Messianic movement who disagree with that expression. But that's why I think it's important that we present ourselves, especially to a Jewish person, as a Messianic congregation. And it's going to vary from person to person, so I don't have a concise answer to your question. And I know it's something that you're just wrestling through, so I'm kind of painting broad strokes a little bit.
Differences between Messianic congregations, and I didn't realize there was a Messianic synagogue. I didn't realize either.
Yeah, so like Or HaOlam is another Messianic congregation in Kansas City that's not under Tikkun, so they're under a different governing body, but they are a Messianic synagogue.
Who was that?
Or HaOlam.
Oh.
Adat Yeshua?
Adat Yeshua.
I think so. And they are a Messianic synagogue. So yeah.
For those Jewish people that want to keep their regular schedule.
Yeah, it's more traditional. And so...
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, and so... And within Tikkun even, I'm trying to remember some of the names of the congregations. There's a spectrum of expressions within Tikkun congregations. So, all that to say, if you were to go on the Tikkun website and you're going to be in Virginia... There's several Messianic congregations in Virginia, but if you were to walk into one of those, even though they're a Tikkun congregation, the service is going to look very different than ours. Very different. Because especially like Aaron Alsbrook is a Messianic rabbi in Virginia, and his service is going to be a synagogue service.
Don't most of them, with the exception of kind of like ours, are for the most part they're all led by Messianic rabbis, correct? A lot of them.
A lot of them, I would say, in the Messianic movement in general, yes. Within Tikkun, it's quite a mixture. There are several Gentile-led congregations. There are several that are led by Jewish people who are not ordained rabbis. So there's quite a mixture.
But that's kind of grown, right? Because I think they said when Paul first started this, we were a little bit different.
Yeah.
coming under Tikkun than what
Yeah,
they
and we
were
still
used
would
to.
be, and in the Tikkun world, we are at the end of the spectrum on the Messianic congregation, Gentile-led, dual heritage model. But we are kind of intentionally doing some things differently under guidance and leadership of Tikkun. So, with some of that being said, let me come back to your question about, we talked about things that we don't do, but what do we do? So I think that what we do need to do is have a service, is have some kind of tradition that sets apart the day. So I think it is important on a Friday night to have some kind of meal or tradition that helps to set apart the Sabbath day. So my view, and there would potentially be others even within our congregation that would differ on this a little bit, but so I'm just speaking for myself. I don't know that I think that has to look like a whole Shabbat dinner, the whole deal, but I think it is helpful. I've noticed in my own life it's really helpful if I'm home on a Friday night for me to light Shabbat candles, which is actually not even a biblical tradition. No. But it's something that I do. It's an action that's connecting me with, okay, this is a different time. I'm not going to do the same things I've been doing all week. This is it helps my brain switch, basically. So I think doing something like that, even taking a few minutes to pray and ask the Lord for rest on Shabbat, or thanking him for all, different things. And for me, that's fairly unstructured. Some people want to do a more traditional, going through either a traditional Siddur or a Messianic Siddur with some of the prayers, which some of even this Exodus portion is in there, because it has in there, I don't know if you recognize from our liturgy that we even do on Saturdays, for in 6 days God created the heavens and the earth, on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. That's part of the traditional Kiddush prayers for Friday night, and we do it in our liturgy frequently. So I think recognizing creation and the Exodus is even appropriate in a Messianic context. And then also, thank you, Lord, for sending Yeshua. Thank you, God, for sending Yeshua, the light of the world, who has come, to make atonement and all the, I think we have a very Messianic aspect. So I think intentionally doing, I would say for as far as things we do, I think intentionally doing things that make the day set apart is important, if that makes sense. So I think in some ways that involves prayer and worship and fellowship and a service. But I tend to be on the edge, and like I said, there would be people. I didn't know if Tom was going to be here today. He would even say some things that are slightly different probably from me as far as what Shabbat looks like. Some people are really committed to trying to stay off their phones or off of technology or off of social media and stuff like that, partially just because it just is too much for our brains probably, but things like that. And so our congregation tends to take a little bit more of the lens of like each person or family kind of needs to ask the Lord a little bit what that looks like. Others in the movement would give a little bit more of probably a structured response to that. But part of my goal was to see, one, that Shabbat is important. Mm-hmm. And also I'm glad some of these things came up, but I know I probably didn't give a lot of answers. I probably made some things more confusing. But I do think it's important that we recognize being part of a Messianic congregation part of that is wrestling through these issues, and that is going to look different for different people and different families. Mm-hmm. And our movement is still relatively young, and but I think that aligning with Israel and the Jewish people through observing Shabbat and the other holidays, which is again why I brought these books. I already mentioned the Passover one, but the other one I brought up, and partially just because we're getting close to the spring holiday season, God's Appointed Times. This is a good Messianic resource for understanding the biblical holidays in a Messianic context. And so it's sometimes a helpful reference before the holidays come up, since we're getting Passover will be at the end of this month, and which I'm excited about. I love Passover. So anyway, I probably didn't give you a great answer to your question.
You kind of did in a way.
Maybe not the way that you wanted.
Basically, if we don't have a rabbi to tell us it's wrong, then really there's nobody to tell us we're doing it wrong that it would be well to listen to.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, this is we don't have, and this is the challenging part with figuring out what Torah observance even means exactly, is because we don't have a even within Judaism, there is no specific governing authority currently.
Right.
So it just makes life complicated.
Well, and Yeshua came up against that
Mm-hmm.
because they had put a bunch of laws and regulations on Shabbat
Right.
that the Lord had not intended it to look like that. So even when they didn't want to, you're not allowed to heal somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Who says you can't do good
Right.
on Shabbat?
Right.
So, that's the whole thing. You can load it down with law,
Yeah.
then you lose the life and the essence.
Right. Which I'm glad you said that, because this is our other Torah study principle, right? Is how does this connect us to Yeshua? So it turns out Yeshua was kind to us and said some things about Shabbat. So we have just a couple minutes left, so I'm going to bring us full circle there, and then we will go to service. But just to even go along with what you're saying, even in the Torah, there's this idea of life, right? Shabbat kind of brings us life. Mm-hmm. And even in caring for animals, you don't, yes, Shabbat is for rest, but you would still milk your cows because it's uncomfortable for the cow to not be milked, right? Yeah. So there is this concept of, yes, no work, but also not unto creating discomfort and pain.
Yeah.
So the example that I was going to bring up with Yeshua and Shabbat is from Mark 2. So this is, Mark's gospel. This is right after, Yeshua has healed a paralytic, and he's, hanging out with tax collectors and sinners, and everybody's mad at him about that. John's disciples and the Pharisees are fasting, and he's not, and he's like, you don't fast while the bridegroom is among you. So then in Mark 2:23, we have this little section about Shabbat. He says, now it happened on Shabbat that Yeshua was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to make their way, plucking the heads of grain. The Pharisees were saying to him, look, why are they doing what is not permitted on Shabbat? And he said to them, haven't you ever read what David did when he was in need, and when he and those with him became hungry, how he entered into the house of God when Abiathar was Kohen Gadol and ate the showbread, which is permitted only for the Kohanim to eat, and gave some even to those who were with him. Then he said to them, Shabbat was made for man and not man for Shabbat. So the Son of Man is Lord even of Shabbat. And there's other examples we could do, but I wanted to bring this one out because it has this closing line of Shabbat was made for man and not man for Shabbat. Mm-hmm. So all that to say, it seems like from just this passage, because, they're walking through the fields plucking grain, which is harvesting, which is work, which is what you're not supposed to do. But if the option is that they're going hungry, that's not Shabbat, right?
Because you don't normally fast on Shabbat.
No, you don't normally fast on Shabbat. I think the only exception to that would probably be if Yom Kippur falls on Shabbat, which it has before since I've been at KL. It was a very interesting Shabbat. But that's really probably the only time you don't fast on Shabbat, because Shabbat is about life. And in our Messianic context, what else is Shabbat? What's maybe another thing that we could add about Shabbat? What are we looking toward? The return. We're looking toward the age to come. We often talk about Shabbat as this, this meeting of heaven and earth, of this, the veil becomes thin. We have all these different things that we say. But the point is, we feel a little bit closer. So we're looking unto the return of Yeshua, the restoration of all things, the age to come, when all is made right. So that's another thing that I would add to how we decide and discern what we should do or not do on Shabbat, is looking toward, does this bring us life? Does it restore us? Which is, even goes back to why, I tend to just spend really relaxed time with friends, because I'm a quality time person, and it's very life-giving to me to spend time with people, talking and just being together, drinking good coffee. So anyway, I know that was a lot of information and a lot of different perspectives on different things, but anyway, I hope it is a little bit helpful to think about Shabbat and its significance and how we need to think about it.
It's only a sign of freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because only 3 people can take a Shabbat, can decide to take a rest, because the people of Israel, when they were Egypt, they were slaves, they couldn't
Exactly.
take the day. So it's like this
Right.
freedom that now is bringing them to.
Yeah.
You can actually stop what you are doing. You can connect with God and others and creation and rest and
Yeah.
be refreshed. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
What does KL stand on it? They're under Tikkun, so would that come down from like Dan Jester or something about a teaching on Shabbat, or what we should or shouldn't do? Or
Yeah.
So much.
And
I
I
don't know
mean,
if they have anything like that.
I don't know that they have anything, formally out there. I mean, I know Dan talks about Shabbat and talks about service and different things in some of his books and some of his things. Like, I think Jewish Roots probably talks about it. I didn't pull that one out this morning, but
I liked his teaching on the Christmas tree
yeah.
and Christmas.
Yeah.
Because people get really hung up on that.
Yeah, because
You know?
Dan is very. This is why I like Dan and being under his leadership, is because he loves the church, because I think that's something we need to be careful of in the Messianic movement as well, is that we may be doing things differently than the church, and we might disagree with some of those things, and we might recognize that there's, systemic anti-Semitism throughout church history, but they've also preserved the name of Yeshua and the worship of Yeshua for 2,000 years. So we can't, say see you later to everything about the church. So it's a hard balance. It's another one of those things to wrestle through. But yeah, that's one of the things I like about Dan, because he, and he would, I don't know that I've read a lot of things. I've heard him talk about Shabbat and things before, but he is more willing to encourage, the spectrum of observance and things like that too. So
It's all about the heart.
Mhm.
You know?
yeah, and
It's
because
what's in the heart.
none of the practice and tradition
Yeah.
really has any meaning without the heart posture behind it.
Right.
So that
Well, when he's come to our services, he said that he thinks that we've struck a nice balance
Yeah.
between
mhm.
the Jew and Gentile.
Right. Again, because that's really one of the goals of our congregation, is to build this reality of Jew and Gentile worshiping together in unity. So then that's why we've kind of coined this dual heritage term, which a lot of other congregations, even within Tikkun, don't do it. But he would say that, a more traditional synagogue Messianic service, that is a good expression as well. And so, that's what I'm saying. It's like it kind of depends on the congregation, the group of people that you have. And so, there's a lot of factors that go into that.
Yeah.
There's no one right way is the point.
Oh, I'm just saying that's really important. Yeshua is the Lord of
Yeah.
each one. So in the covenant with Holy Spirit, He guides us. Like we ask Him, how does my Shabbat look?
Yeah.
How is our service to look? Or how And He's been helping me change how I spend that day without me asking anyone. I sunrise to sunset or sunset to sunset, or however, when change how I welcome the day, or change how I
Sure.
turn the TV off or whatever, because he's our Lord, so
Yeah.
he is in charge. It's like it's your heart, but it's the Holy Spirit in you.
Yeah.
Like for me, I feel like that if he's over us, both Christian and Jewish and then Messianic, then that's how we
Mhm.
Well, and there's no judgment in that.
Yeah.
I don't think.
I don't mean to say judgment. Do
But
I?
I mean, a lot
No.
of people think that there's, it's wrong, to have Sabbath on Sunday
Oh.
and whatever, but it doesn't affect our salvation.
No, I'm like,
Yeah.
That's like it doesn't. It's like
Yeah.
Shabbat with the Lord. So I'm like,
Right.
That's why
It's-
I like Dan. Like she said, he's
Yeah.
not in war with us. He's not.
Yeah.
positive.
It's different. It comes back to this principle of deference. It's like, yes, there are things to stand on that there are hills to die on, but some of the hills that we die on are not hills we should die on.
Yeah.
So anyway, I just kind of wanted to lay out a bunch of different things with that. So it is time to go to service. So I will pray and we will go. So Lord, I thank you for this day. I thank you for Shabbat. I thank you for this day that is set apart for worship and rest, to remember that you are the God of creation, that you are the God who brought your people out of Israel, and that you are the God who is to come again. We look forward to your return, Lord, and we just we ask that your kingdom would come today, that your will would be done on the earth as it is in heaven today in our service. We just ask that your presence would be here. We ask for, hopefully the water issue is fixed, but if it's not, we just ask for grace to get through the rest of the day with that issue. And Lord, I do thank you for your presence and for your word and for this group of people.